freedom at a time when freedom is needed the most.
Hello, my name is Mr. Rowe. I am the host of Reality Extraction, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. I utilize logic, intellect, and magic to methodically atomize, vivisect, analyze, examine, study, scrutinize, and extract an essence of reality from a fog of illusion and confusion. You can find me on Studio B every Thursday, 1700 hours Pacific Time. That's 8 p.m. Eastern. No topic taboo, no subject too strange. I strive to take a neutral standpoint during the dissection of the topic at hand. That's Reality Extraction with Mr. Rowe on Revolution Radio.
What is going on here? I demand an explanation.
We work for a highly funded yet unofficial government agency.
An intelligence organization that fears intelligence, historically not awesome.
The United States is a democratic nation. Here the people rule. We build no walls to keep them in, nor organize any system of police to keep them mute.
Freedom isn't free at all, but it comes with the highest of costs.
We have you, the listeners, and the hosts at
Revolution Radio,
for allowing us to bring you a platform of free speech.
Right now, it's 12 o'clock, Americans, another day closer to victory. And for all of you out there on or behind the lines,
clocks run out. Time's up.
Wind is blowing cold and dark. On the road and no way out. Broken hearts, the smoking gun. On the run, on the run.
My name's Jimmy. It's Monday. It's time for the prime time chunk into the microcosm on the air.
Yeah, you got satin shoes. Yeah, you got
We got a very special show planned for you tonight. Brandy's been out working hard and heavy to find some really great guests, and today, ladies and gentlemen, she has succeeded.
another round. She serves them whiskey and wine. They say, Brandy, you're a fine girl. What a good wife you would be.
Brandy Lou. Hola.
Regina, I'm here.
Excelente. Well, hey, good to see you. Look great. You smell great. Everything's great. And it's Monday, and it's Brandy's day to take the helm. Old Jimmy's just going to sit back here on the old back of the boat. Brandy, and I'm going to toss you the captain's cap. Because let me just say, you have earned the captain's cap this Monday, primetime, revolution.radio, freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported freedom of speech platform on the internet, in the ether space, and beyond, ladies and gentlemen. Come on down. Support free speech. Studio A, Studio B, 48 hours a day, 7 days a week. Free speech right here. If there's a viewpoint, you can find it. I'm telling you now. Just there's not even a question. Become a patron. You can sponsor us monthly. Not us personally. We are volunteer, completely volunteers. All the broadcasters are volunteers. What you're paying for and what you're donating to is the platform. Freedomslips.com, Patreon at the top, Zazzle store in the middle, unique items, all items there go. A piece of that goes to supporting the network. Archives are free because you've been helping us out. You don't like the internet, you don't like the electronics, go down to the bottom. Lady Horse's address is down there. You can send her some of those Federal Reserve notes before they get inflated out of your ability to use them. Brady Lou, all you that?
I'm back. I caught that captain's hat. I put it on, and it's a little big, but I can just push the brim up.
There you go.
Because, you know, Jimmy was wearing it, but I'll grow into it.
If it smells like Old Spice, I was probably wearing it. But listen, if your granddaddy wasn't wearing Old Spice, you probably wouldn't be here. So let me just say that.
That is probably true. Well, I've got my MicroCosm perfume on. That's what you smell. So
nice.
That should serve us well to get us going.
All right. Well, listen, we have such an interesting guest. I really don't want to waste time with a bunch of chit chat. I'd really like to get into speaking with her. So why don't you introduce our guest and tell everybody what we're going to be getting into today?
Happy to. I have Laura SanGer, PhD, with us today. She's a clinical psychologist hailing from Salt Lake City, Utah. She's an author of the book, The Roots of the Federal Reserve, Tracing the Nephilim from Noah to the U.S. Dollar. Fascinating title. And it is a fascinating subject. The deep research that she's done helps us pull in the puzzle pieces that, hang around on the sides and we can't quite fit them in. Well, she pulls them in so that we can see the picture in a way that just makes sense. And I'm really excited to present her to the audience and welcome her into the microcosm. I'm so glad you're here, Laura. And I'm excited for everybody to learn from you as well. I think it's going to be just a really interesting time. I do have a question to start us off. I'm really wondering, Laura, what in the world led you to get into the studies of the Nephilim and the roots of the Federal Reserve? I never would have put them together.
I know. It is an interesting connection, isn't it? I actually, what is interesting is that my journey into the Nephilim really was through the Federal Reserve, which seems very, very strange. But so as you mentioned, my background is in psychology, and I also have a master's in theology. But I have one of those really inquisitive minds where I'm just kind of always forming questions in my head and doing research. And I've been doing some level of research since 1989. And so long about 2009, after the economy crashed, we were going through some personal things in our own life. Our youngest son was diagnosed with kidney failure. And we were hospitalized with him. And so during that time, that's when the economy fell apart. And so it was a challenging time for us because not only were we facing, life-threatening situation for our youngest son, but I had to pull back from my form of employment and take care of him full time. And my husband's salary was reduced at the time. And so we were facing this mountain of medical debt with all the treatments that he went through and surgery and all of that. And so I kind of went into a bit of a fog, really, for a couple of years, about a year and a half. And just, trying to work through the trauma of that experience. And when I pulled out of it, I was really wondering what the heck happened to our economy, because, we were hospitalized with him in the end of 2008. And that was, right around the time when things started falling apart. And so I began, just starting to do some research on my own about, what happened. And that led me to looking into the Federal Reserve. And then, one thing led to another. And here I am, after 4 years of research and writing, I was able to trace the roots of the Federal Reserve back to the Nephilim in Genesis 6. So it's been quite the ride.
Well, that sounds like it. That sounds like
definitely not one to sit on your hands.
No, I love to dig deep. And, in the process of writing this book, I got to say, so many of my own paradigms have shifted. I had no idea how deep the rabbit hole is. And I feel like I'm just scratching the surface still.
What I love about you doing this is you have a credible voice. And because of your clinical expertise and experiences and your education, which people respect education for sure, you're coming at this from a position of people will listen. And that's really great, because we do need those kind of voices as well. And I hope that people will listen and do respect what you're saying, and that those paradigms that they've built up will be something that they can think beyond. And what is that, sacred cows? Do you remember that phrase of sacred cows? You have to break those down. It's the way that people think about things, and it's just really hard for them to let go, and that they can let go of those things as well. And we need to think about what that Nephilim agenda is. What's the reasoning behind all this? What is it that is happening that we need to be concerned about? And it sounds to me like your book addresses that as well.
It does, yeah. And one of the areas of expertise that I have outside of clinical psychology is in the area of spiritual mapping. And I don't know if you're familiar with that term, and your listeners may or may not be, but essentially what spiritual mapping is it consists of gathering research on the physical, social, and spiritual pulse of a society. And so it involves digging deep into history to uncover those ancient roots of defilement. And so what I've done is I've actually incorporated some of what I've done in spiritual mapping into writing this book. And there's actually 3 different components to spiritual mapping. One of them is what we call reconnaissance, and then there's the research arm, and then there's informed intercession. And so with reconnaissance, what we do is, given whatever prayer assignment we might have, we send people onto the land. So we have people that are particularly gifted in the areas of discernment, which would be, those people, once they get on the land, they can feel and sense and see what's happened in the past. What are those things that maybe have brought defilement onto the land? And another way to think about it, everything has vibration and frequency. And so when you get onto the land itself, you can pick up that vibration or those frequencies, and you can discern whether or not it's positive or negative, what might have taken place. And then with the research arm, that's, like I said, it's digging into history. It's, looking at demographic data. It might be interviewing locals, asking them things that have happened in the past in that particular area or region. And then it's also, scouring through old newspaper articles and things like that. And essentially what we do is we bring the information from both of those components together and write what's called a prayer brief. And that is, we have like strategic prayer points where we're going to target our prayers to bring breakthrough in an area. And there's there's 4 areas of iniquity that can create a stronghold on the land. And when you think about stronghold, a way to think about it is like a stranglehold on the life of a community. So people living in the community may have no idea that there's a stronghold at work, but they feel the impact of it. And so whether that's, poverty or bankruptcies or high suicide rates or domestic violence, those types of things, that those can be a result of a stronghold. And so anyways, the 4 iniquities that lead to that are sexual perversion, idolatry, bloodshed, and broken covenant. And so what we do in spiritual mapping is we identify, okay, what iniquities have happened on this land. And what that does is that enables intercessors to be able to enter into that mediator role and ask the Lord for forgiveness on behalf of those that have committed those iniquitous acts on the land. And then what that does is that breaks the power of the curses and releases the full measure of blessing on the land. So I take some of those principles, and in the book that I wrote, it's really an investigation into the roots of the Federal Reserve. What are those roots of defilement? And what I do is I trace this agenda, the Nephilim Agenda, from the days of Noah to our current debt enslavement system that we call the Federal Reserve. And so one of the things that I think really inspired me as I was writing the book is Thomas Jefferson once said, "Educate and inform the whole mass of people. They're the only sure reliance for the preservation of our liberty." And so my hope is that, in the book that I wrote, but also when I have opportunities like today and I get to, share about this Nephilim agenda, my hope is that what I'm doing is I'm shining a light on this agenda that's been hidden in the shadows of history. So I just wanted to give a little bit of that backdrop because that kind of forms the foundation of what I've done. So I don't know if you had any questions with that, but I can jump in also to what the Nephilim Agenda is.
You know what? Why don't you go ahead and do that? But before, I wanted to sort of make an observation that's really, it's cool. I think in years past, there's been a real separation between the real spiritual aspect of, for lack of a better term, religions and belief systems, and that spiritual aspect. And a lot of those religions and belief systems got pushed out, like it wasn't something that should be done. But I'm seeing a real sort of awakening and more of an awareness of the need for us to look at these things and look at what's happened in the past and consider what can we actively do to help bring healing and awareness and understanding of how that spiritual aspect really is a part of our lives. And we see in scientific research, for example, bringing crystals of sand or sugar and, exposing it to different beats of music, and it creates different patterns. And I'm sure that the audience is probably aware of all of that. But that, to me, is really indicative of how we are affected by the spiritual. Yes. Yeah. And it's really important for us because that is the way that our world was created. And to ignore it is to our, and it's very negative for us because it doesn't give us if we don't pay attention to it, we don't have the information to make good decisions and choices about how to move forward. So I think it's real important that we pay attention and take those steps. So I'm really glad that you're sharing that aspect of it with us. And with that said, I would love it if you could go ahead and talk about the Nephilim a little bit more.
Absolutely. So the Nephilim Agenda, it was unleashed during the days of Noah. And so essentially it's a plan to defile the human genome through propagating a hybrid race. And the purpose of which is to stage a coup d'etat against Almighty God. And so in order to understand the Nephilim Agenda more, we actually have to go back to the origins of the seed war. And people might not be familiar with what that is, but it's found in Genesis 3, verses 14 and 15. And It says, "So the Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this, you are cursed more than all cattle and more than every beast of the field. On your belly you shall go, and you shall eat dust all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." So what we have here is, as a result of the fall, God declared war on the seed of Eve, between the seed of Eve, which is humanity, and the seed of Satan. And so what we see is that Eve's seed one day will crush Satan. And essentially, this is a prophetic declaration of the coming Messiah. And so Satan's strategy was to contaminate the seed of the woman by altering the genetic code of humans, with the hopes that the birth of the Messiah wouldn't be possible. And so this is where we see that the strategy, the fallen sons of God, become integral in Satan's strategy. You know, when they decide to leave their heavenly abode, invade the earth realm, mate with the daughters of men, defile the human genome by birthing this Nephilim race, which is a hybrid race of giants. And so the Nephilim are the seed of Satan. They are created in his image. And we can learn more about the Nephilim, by looking at extra biblical manuscripts, such as the Book of Enoch. And actually, in the Book of Enoch, it talks about 200 watchers, or fallen sons of God. They descend upon Mount Hermon with a plot to overthrow God's kingdom. And so they have this intent of creating their own human race to usurp Almighty Elohim. And so it's interesting because, well, one of the things I should say that I did in my book, or actually in the research and writing it, is I really dug into the meaning of the words and the original language. So I think of it like performing an archaeological dig on language, because it really begins to unlock the hidden meanings behind some of these phrases and our understanding of these mysteries. And another way to think about it.
And, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I don't know if our audience realizes how much our language it's twisted. The words that we use every day, even in contracts and education and so forth, they don't necessarily mean what we think they mean.
They don't. But I want to go back. I want to go back a little bit. You're right. The language is and the definition, the lexicon of understanding is different. Definitions that meant something at one time, the word now doesn't mean the same thing that it used to. But I want to go back to this Eve situation. Because now, is this would you say is this a representation along these same lines that the fall from heaven, or that the snake in the Garden of Eden was Eve not only being with Adam but also being with somebody else of a different bloodline? And so is this the bloodline of Cain that you're talking about? I'm just curious if it fits into some of what you've discovered.
I think that definitely is a perspective that some people have, is that this is the line of Cain. But I'll actually, as we progress, I see it differently, and so I can talk about that because there are lots of perspectives on the Nephilim. Where did they come from? Mm-hmm. How were there giants on the earth after the flood? Mm-hmm. And I would love to dive into that because I find it so fascinating.
It is. And these red-haired giants
yes.
and this tribe of Dan and these things that seem to have come directly out of Egypt and Babylon, and the way that these different parts of everything work together to end up where we are today. And the fact that you've gone back and actually found trails to give you discovery that I don't think a lot of people have had a chance to even hear or know about. So I'm very grateful that you're here, and I can't wait to hear more about it. It's very exciting. Go ahead, Brany, you were saying something about the way words work?
That basically was it, but I wanted to also bring up the fact that she has a really interesting view and description of red, the word red, as it pertains to all of this, and she'll, I'm sure, be getting that as well.
Yes.
Nice.
Go ahead, Laura.
So as I mentioned, I felt like it was really important to dig into the etymology of these words. So I'll give you an example. If we think about the word Hermon, as in Mount Hermon, where the fallen sons of God descended, in the Hebrew, that word is Hermon, and it comes from a root word called haram. Now, forgive me, I don't know if I'm pronouncing these accurately, but essentially what haram means is to completely destroy, exterminate, and to devote for destruction. And so it's a term that denotes Yahweh's absolute disdain for particular types of sin, and especially those that involve the interbreeding of species. And so when God commands haram, what he's doing is he is calling for punishment by total annihilation because of the mixing of species. And so that'll become important as I lay some of this stuff out. So one example is when God commanded Saul to haram the Amalekites. Now, the Amalekites, they were these vicious plunderers. And if we go back to when Israel was leaving, when they were exiting Egypt, the Egyptians actually handed over their wealth to the Israelites, and that caught the eye of the Amalekites. And so the Amalekites were actually the first foe to attack the Israelites when they left Egypt. And the Amalekites, they wanted the plunder for themselves. And so their strategy of attack was to separate those that straggled behind in the caravan. So that would have been, the frail, the elderly, those that are sick, children, nursing mothers. And those people became easier prey for the Amalekites, and they attacked. But what's interesting is to think about, so who are the Amalekites? Where did they come from? Again, I've got this inquisitive mind, so I'm always asking questions.
We're going to be right back, ladies and gentlemen. Laura SanGer, Dr. Laura SanGer, Brany LoU. Okay, we're gone from the network. You guys can speak freely. There's a bunch. There's like there's 7. You got 17. Hey, Brady, you're breaking up real bad. Stop moving around. You're breaking up. You got about 17 people in the chat room over here on her channel. So they're over there saying hi to you. They like what you're saying, Laura. In case you can't
Fantastic.
hear. Yeah, in case you can't hear Brandy, because she's going in and out there. It was kind of happening a little bit towards the end, but wasn't that bad, Brandy.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's interesting is when I find with each broadcast I've done,
Mm-hmm.
and you might experience this a lot too, but when I start talking about the Nephilim,
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes technology issues and voices start getting cut out and things like that.
Yeah, it's not surprising. This type of information where there's an alternative viewpoint seems to, attract attention, especially if it's, a lot of stuff people just didn't have a mind to look at, and I mean, over time, some of these things have just turned out to be, like recently I've been looking into these religious structures that sit on these electrical grids, under, the ley line grids, and looking at some of these churches and cathedrals and coming to the realization that they weren't just places of worship, but they also were energy generation devices. Whether that means the energy was being generated by the religious fervor and the tonal quality of what was going on inside there, with the way that the acoustics were set up and the way that sound propagates frequency. So we don't know, but it's an interesting subject. But it's an alternative view of history that doesn't seem to be that people don't like to hear for whatever reason,
Right.
just like what you have. All right, listen, we got 1 minute. I've been rattling away here just to give Brandy a moment to get it together. Are you good there, Brandy?
I think so.
Yeah,
it was lying out on me. I couldn't even see your cues to tell us this break was coming.
I didn't see it. It's the break snuck up on me. So, but you were perfect.
Oh, okay.
But she saw me and she stopped, so that was good.
All
right, so you are.
She knows what she's doing.
Yeah, you know what you're doing. All right, so stand by. I'm gonna get some music.
All right.
Get some music to come back with, Actually, you know what? I'll come back with this. It's a lot nicer. So we got to go back. Here we go. So if you guys don't mind muting up, I'd appreciate it. And here we go. And a 1, 2, 3.
Integrating this conscious unity into the galactic paradigm. So welcome all, both terrestrial beings and galactic beings as one. So be it. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
Tried for years and years to use passive resistance and loud voices to make a change. The time is over. Your governments around the world have no other goal than to decimate your entire existence at the hands of the bankers and the elites. The war is coming, and it's your choice to decide if you want to be a warrior or a victim. Denial is not a choice anymore. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the planet. Not giving up. Revolution Radio. All right, thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
My name is Jimmy. It's Revolution Radio. It's Monday. Welcome into the MicroCosm. Brany LoU is at the helm. Dr. Laura SanGer's here. We're talking about the Nephilim. Brany LoU, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. Well, there you go. I'm back. You're back. We're back. Revolution Radio is online. freedomslips.com. Come on down. Become a patron. So let me just toss the keys back over to you, and I'm going to go sit on the back of the boat with my cold beverage here. And I'm interested in this conversation.
Jimmy, you know I'm a terrible catcher. They just landed right between my feet, but that's okay.
That's no problem. That's no worries.
Start her up here again.
There you go.
Push on that cap. I've got that captain's hat still on, and it's getting a little tighter because Laura is filling my head with so much knowledge that I think it's growing. Laura, come
Skipper.
on back in here and go ahead and continue with what you were talking about with the Nephilim and how everything that's going on and the spiritual things around us, how they affect us, and the types of things we can do about it. What else do you have to say about that?
Well, I'll pick up where I left off. I was talking about the Amalekites and I was curious, where did the Amalekites come from? And this will all play into the big picture as I unravel these things. So one perspective is the Amalekites came from Amalek, and Amalek was a grandson of Esau. So Esau had a son named Eliphaz, and Eliphaz had a Horite concubine named Timnah. And Timnah bore Eliphaz's son, and they named him Amalek. Now, what's important to understand is that the Horites, they're listed in Genesis 14 among a list of tribes of giants. But most scholars don't believe that the Horites themselves were actually giants, but more that they interbred with the giants. And so in understanding that, what that means is that it's possible that Amalek had the genes of the Nephilim in him, but we also know that Amalek had inherited the extreme hatred that Esau had towards Jacob. And so what happens is, as the generations progress, the strife between Esau's descendants and Jacob's descendants intensify. And so the Amalekites actually become one of Israel's worst enemies. So if we think about that, before the break, I was talking about that Hebrew word haram, and how God commanded Saul to haram the Amalekites, so to completely destroy them. And when we think about that, there's probably two reasons at least that God commanded haram, and that is, the first one being that the Amalekites were merciless in their attack of the burgeoning nation of Israel. But then second, it's because the Amalekites interbred with the giants, and so they propagated that Nephilim seed. And so that's why Saul was commanded to haram the Amalekites, but he failed to do that. And so during Saul's reign, Agag was king of the Amalekites. And what we find is that Saul didn't walk in the fear of the Lord. Rather, he gave in to the whims and, of his fancy, and he preserved King Agag's life. And we know that through reading the account from the Jewish historian Josephus. And he says, Saul also took Agag, the enemy's king, captive, the beauty and tallness of whose body he admired so much that he thought him worthy of preservation. I find that fascinating. So here we have that Agag most likely was a giant, and Saul preserved someone with a defiled genome. So on that particular day, in that particular battle in the seed wars, Saul handed the enemy a victory because he aligned with the seed of Satan. And I think that's why Saul lost his kingship. So
are you basically saying here then, you think that's what carried on this Nephilim gene?
That was, it's kind of a line of progression, and this definitely was an important piece. But actually, what I'll do in a minute, if you'd like, is I can talk about how kind of this age-old question of how were there giants on the earth after the flood, because the Nephilim genes were actually turned on prior to this story that I'm talking to you about. But what's interesting to understand is just this example of the Nephilim agenda and how Saul was commanded to haram the Amalekites, because God knew that this Nephilim agenda would play out through the Amalekites, and how that would become part of history, and how they're trying to wipe out humanity. So if we think about Satan's strategy to defile the human genome so that the Messiah wouldn't be born, we know that was an utter failure, because Jesus was born and he won the seed war. And so what that did is that forced the Nephilim to alter their end goal. And so the Nephilim agenda in the common era has been to destroy those who follow Jesus while enslaving the masses through control, manipulation, and domination. And there still is a component to this agenda where it's about defiling the human genome, because if they can alter the genetic code of humans, then they can get in the way of humans being able to have a relationship with Almighty God. And so that's important to understand. And, you know, Satan, the Watchers, the Nephilim, they all know that they're going to have this final battle at the end of the ages. And, you know, the outcome of that will be their banishment to the lake of fire for eternity. And there's no way that they can win the battle. But what they're doing in the meantime is they're taking as many casualties as possible. And so the Nephilim agenda and the globalist agenda are serving the same end goal, and that's the total domination of humanity. And it's really about ushering in the new world order. And if we think about it, it's the same agenda really that Hitler had when he was trying to create a perfect Aryan race to supplant humanity.
There's a real parallel there if you don't have to think too hard to see it.
Right. And so then, you know, we wonder, like, what in our current day, how is this Nephilim agenda being advanced? And, you know, it's being advanced in numerous ways, but one of which is transhumanism. And transhumanism used to be on the fringe, you know, used to be conspiracy theory. But December of 2020, the former Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe, he brought it front and center when he wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal and then also was on Maria Bartiromo's Sunday Morning Futures. He talked about the threat that China is to our nation. And what he said was, you know, China's, the size of China's military, they have 2 million soldiers. But even more than that, what the People's Republic of China is doing is they are using gene editing to alter the DNA of their soldiers. So what they're doing is they're changing the genetic code to create super soldiers or humans 2.0 in order so those soldiers can withstand harsher circumstances and they can last longer than pure humans. And so that's alarming. And we just need to understand that this is no longer fringe. This is happening. And it was brought into front and center the discussion by DNI Ratcliffe.
Wow. So people have basically heard that there is not only possibility, and it's not just conspiracy theory, that this can be done. And yet so many people have a hard time accepting it. And I wonder, are they just really maybe afraid of the truth? What do you think about that?
I do think fear is a huge component, and the globalists know that, and they play us. They strike up fear, and when we walk in fear, we can't think critically. You know, fear is that reptilian brain. It's you know, the amygdala is huge at play with fear, and so when we're in a constant state of fear, we simply cannot critically think, and really that is another part of the Nephilim agenda that's been rolled out in 2020 through this COVID-19. And when we think about it, you know, the quote unquote vaccine for COVID-19, that also is part of the Nephilim agenda. And so here we have, I think I should not say that because that's not true yet, but a growing number of people are realizing that this is an experimental injection and not a vaccine. And you know, one of the reasons is pretty straightforward, and that is that the FDA has not approved it as a vaccine. It is only approved for experimental use authorization only. And so that's important for people to understand. But what's happening is that we have an injection that people are getting, and like I said, it's experimental. But if we think about the SARS-CoV-1, so when that first hit the scene back in 2003, they tried to develop vaccines, and they were unsuccessful in developing a vaccine. And we know from the literature that the SARS-CoV-1 is very similar to SARS-CoV-2. So it behooves us to understand, well, why couldn't they get a vaccine for the first go around? And it's because they could never make it past the animal experiments. And what we have in Operation Warp Speed is we have, you know, in the race to make the vaccine available to the public, what the pharmaceutical companies did is they began phase 1, 2, and 3 human trials before completing the prerequisite animal studies. And so what was very concerning about the animal studies is that they, initially when they gave the animals the vaccine, they showed a positive response. There was this robust antibody response to the vaccine. But then when the animals were exposed to the virus in the wild, they became gravely ill and died. And what happened is something called the antibody-dependent enhancement. And what that is when the antibodies from the vaccine, they get hyper-induced and they actually start attacking the organs, and that triggers that cytokine storm. And so because this was happening in the animals, they had to stop the human trials. And that's why we don't have a vaccine from SARS-CoV-1. But what's alarming is that the animal trials or the animal studies were not completed before they started the human trials. So that's one aspect. But another aspect is that, with this injection, there's experimental ingredients within the injection. And so it's entering into people's bodies and it produces that spike protein, which can alter the genes. And so you have this synthetic piece of DNA, and synthetic means it's not natural, and it's going into the body, gets replicated by the mRNA. And I was just listening today to Dr. Simone Gold, and she said that what researchers are discovering is that once you get an injection, your body will make 13 trillion spike proteins. And so here we have the potential of altering your genetic code. And so therein lies the Nephilim agenda. And so, as we think about this, God in his omniscience, he knew the Nephilim agenda would threaten the existence of humanity until the last days. And so he had to totally annihilate the serpent seed through the flood and restore humanity's genome. And while I believe that God accomplished this, I think the flood was universal and God annihilated the Nephilim, but humanity still had free will. And I believe it's this free will that led to the offspring of the Nephilim populating the earth after the flood.
So then the Nephilim agenda. So basically what you're saying in a nutshell is the Nephilim agenda then was allowed to perpetuate.
Hey, well, speaking of agendas, there's an agenda over on YouTube. And since we're on YouTube and we're simulcasting in the future, I'd appreciate it if you say the word that begins with V. You refer to that as Michelle Pfeiffer.
Oh,
because we're not allowed to say that over here, or else they'll close my channel down.
Yeah, that's my fault.
No problem. Yeah, no problem.
I apologize. I got so involved in the information. Yeah, we get kicked off real easily for stuff, so we can talk about it, but we just have to use substitute terminology.
Yeah, the algorithm.
Yeah.
My bad. I forgot you were simultaneously on YouTube.
Yeah, no problem. It's the algorithm's fault. It's not our fault. We don't care, and there's free speech over here. It's just that, if we can just try to adjust it, it just gives me a little bit of leeway. We lose channels all the time. I get struck out all the time. I got to start over again. So I'm sorry to interrupt. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just figured I better say something before it got out of hand. So go ahead.
That was my job. My captain's hat fell off. So that is fascinating, Laura. And it is true that the fear is the agenda that's used. And if you entrap people in their fear, then they're going to go along with things, especially if you talk about stuff like, you're not going to be able to get things that you need, and you're not going to be able to, go to work and take care of your family. And so that is something that has carried on over the generations, hasn't it? I mean, if you look back, do you see where that's been going on for just hundreds of years?
Yes, and it really is part of the strategy of, you think about mind control tactics, and if you can keep the masses, in fear and in intimidation, then they're not going to rise up, and they're not going to question, they're not going to critically think, they'll just simply follow. And so that very much is part of that Nephilim agenda. And what I think is so fascinating is we touched on it a little bit, but just that, how did the Nephilim, if God wiped out the Nephilim in the flood, how were there giants after the flood? And how did this Nephilim agenda even continue after the flood? And I think that's really, this age-old question is, how in the world did that happen?
Well, was it possible? Was it possible they hid out in some caves down below somewhere? Because there's so much information to point. For example, we had recently, not too long ago, done a show about Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, where yeah, and there was said that there's portals would open up and these giant red-haired giants, these man-eaters, would come out. And there's actually a book written about it. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's called Man-Corn. And they say that they were, potentially growing human beings here to eat. So, I mean, I don't know, and this may seem fantastical and fantasy-like, but I mean, I don't know if this ties into what any of your research. Is there any sort of referencing to these portals or these hiding places where these Nephilim might have been able to squirrel themselves away in order to come back onto the land and then repopulate again with some of these females that were from the earth?
Definitely, I think there's lots of examples of. Sorry, I heard. Were you saying something, Brandy, as well?
Oh, I was just saying that you have a lot of really great information on portals. It's really fascinating.
Yes, and it's definitely part of the equation, I believe. But what I find interesting, in thinking about, so let's say for argument's sake that God totally annihilated all of the Nephilim, because I don't think the Nephilim can outsmart Almighty God, even if they used portals. So if that were the case, then how do we answer this age-old question? And there's two theories that address this. One is multiple incursion, and the other one is single incursion. And kind of what you were touching on, Jimmy, would, I guess, fall under the multiple incursion realm, where, they escaped, but then they came back and made it again with humans. So that would be another example of a multiple incursion. And I talk about this a lot in my book in chapter 8, but in a nutshell, a multiple incursion of the same magnitude as what we find in Genesis 6 simply can't be substantiated. But that doesn't mean there weren't other incursions like we're talking about. And so, one example is in the Mesopotamian culture, they had this practice of sacred marriages, and that is, where there would be that ritualistic sex between a goddess and a king. And that certainly is an example of another incursion. But what I find fascinating is single incursion. So what single incursion is we only have that one time that's described in Genesis 6 where the divine mated with the human. So if God, which I'm arguing that God did annihilate the Nephilim, then how the heck do we have giants on the earth after the flood? And the key to understanding this theory is epigenetics. And so epigenetics is essentially the impact that our thoughts and lifestyle choices have on our body, soul, and spirit, but also our future generations. And so the prefix epi means on top of. So epigenetics is this set of instructions that sits on top of the gene. And then you also have something that's called epigenetic markers. And that's those act like a light switch that can turn on or off a gene. So that becomes really important in understanding.
Do me a favor. We got 2 minutes before the break. Tell everybody where they can find your book, and then don't forget where you are, because this is fascinating. And when we come back at the top of the hour, we will get into it. But tell everybody where they can find your book real quick. We got 2 minutes left before the top of the hour break.
Okay, so there's a couple of ways you can find my book. It's called The Roots of the Federal Reserve, and I have a website called NoLongerEnslaved.com, and you can go to my website and purchase it there, or you can purchase it straight from Barnes & Noble or Amazon. And you'll find on my website other interviews that I've done, but I've also written a number of articles really as a way to kind of expose and help people understand what the truth is behind the pandemic and our monetary system and different things like that. So you can find articles there as well.
Excellent. Okay, Brany, looks like the break's coming up. Ladies and gentlemen, Aftermath.fm is where you can find Into the Microcosm late night, Monday through Friday, 10:30 Pacific. Aftermath.fm, but we're here at Revolution Radio Mondays 3 o'clock Pacific and Friday nights 11 o'clock Pacific, and the late night show is a little bit different than the Monday prime time. So if you like what you hear, step on into the Microcosm Monday through Friday, 10:30 Pacific. Aftermath.fm. I'm Jimmy. Revolution.radio, freedomslips.com, Dr. Laura SanGer, the Nephilim. We'll be right back. Okay, we're out of there. We're out of the radio there. Stand by.
Laura, this is amazing. People in the chat room are really excited about what they're seeing and asking lots of questions.
Yeah,
and it's making them really think. That's good.
You're gonna definitely have to come back for definitely want to come back for a part 2. But definitely don't forget to mention again, before the end of the show, Brany, bring it up again. Give her a couple chances to let everybody know where they can find her material beyond just the book. Yeah, make sure you can do that. I'll get some music together. We got about 2 minutes, so I think it goes in over a couple of minutes on this top of the hour stuff. So I would say we got it right about 4 minutes before we got to come back. So if you want to get a drink or jump up and go run to the ladies' room or whatever, now's the time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. All right, and I'll play some music over here and talk to the chat. So what's up, chat? Tonight is Star Forts tonight. Gonna be wild. I'm telling you right now. So come on back, Jack. Let me see here. Boop doop boop. Boop boop boop. Oh, you know what? Hang on a second. Scooby-Doo. I'm waiting for some good news, man. Pray for me, Brany. I need this good news to come in. Don't mention it, but just pray about it. Just pray that the right thing happens, and that's all that matters. I'll be happy with whatever it is that's supposed to happen happens, but hopefully it happens the way I want it to. It's hard. It's hard, you want it the way you want it, but then maybe that's, you pray, but maybe the answer's not yes. Or maybe it's an answer that you didn't want, you know what I mean? That's what happens. Anyhow, alright, so here we go. We're going to go back We've got a minute on the clock here. It's going to be probably 3 minutes, so 4 minutes when I go back. Ready? Here we go.
Join us as we traverse the starseed paradigm, as expressed in the time-space continuum that we know as the divine expression of love and light. Integrating this conscious unity into the galactic paradigm. So welcome all, both terrestrial beings and galactic beings as one. So be it. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
If you think for 1 second that the Capitol will ever treat us fairly, you are lying to yourselves. Because we know who they are and what they do. This is what they do, and we must fight back. You can torture us and bomb us. Fire is catching. And if we burn, you burn with us.
Good evening.
Are you awake yet? I hope. We've tried and we've tried for years and years to use passive resistance and loud voices to make a change. The time is over. Your governments around the world have no other goal than to decimate your entire existence at the hands of the bankers and the elites. The war is coming, and it's your choice to decide if you want to be a warrior or a victim. Denial is not a choice anymore. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the planet. Not giving up. Revolution Radio. All right, thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And yeah, we're going to get back to your host.
A moment of silence. What is that? It's summertime, man. Yeah, well, never going to be another one of those, I'll tell you that. I mean, in light of what really gets passed off as I don't know, never going to be another.
No, don't you cry. Don't you cry.
It's into the microcosm. Brany LoU. Hola.
Jimmy Dina here. You know, I can always tell when the subject matter is really good because you know what happens? I get hungry.
I know.
Everybody's
got the
to re-energize.
Everybody's got the munchies, and you know what? It is almost 4:20 here on the West Coast. So I'll tell you what. I'm gonna have it be 4:20. Oh, wait a minute. It's 4:20 on this clock. You know what, you guys? I'm gonna step to the back of the boat. It's 4:20. Brany, here's the keys. Have a nice one. Unbelievable conversation. I'm fascinated.
You know, he's always got something in there that says 420. He just, one over every shoulder and in front of him. And I'll tell you what. So, Laura, did you place a marker where you were so that we can just continue from where you were talking?
Absolutely.
Epigenetics.
Yeah,
Epigenetics.
So just to recap before I move forward, so epigenetics is that set of instructions that sits on top of the gene. And so like I mentioned, there's an epigenetic marker or markers that we have, and that acts like a light switch that can turn on or off the gene. So now if we think about that generational component that I mentioned before the break, it gets really fascinating. And there's all sorts of fantastic research in this area, but I'll mention one study in particular, and it's a group of Swedish researchers. The lead researcher's last name is Pembry, and this was back in 2006. And what they looked at is they looked at the eating and lifestyle choices of prepubescent boys, and they looked at the impact that had on their progeny for 2 generations. And so what they found is that boys who overate and or smoked at the age of 10 had children and grandchildren with significantly shorter lifespans, which is very interesting. And there's another fantastic book called Switch On Your Brain by Dr. Carolyn Leaf. And she explains a bit more about epigenetics. And she says the sins of parents create a predisposition, not a destiny. So our choices, which are those epigenetic signals, they alter the expression of our genes through epigenetic markers. And then that can be passed on to our children and grandchildren, ready to predispose them before they're even conceived. And so what happens is our bad choices become their bad predispositions. So now let's apply that to this whole concept of single incursion and how are there giants on the earth after the flood. And so if we look at a few key verses, one of them is Genesis 6:9, and it says, "And these are the origins of Noah. Noah was a just man, being perfect in his generation. Noah was well-pleasing to God." Okay, so now here with my inquisitive mind, always asking questions, I'm like, well, what the heck does it mean that Noah is perfect in his generation? And so digging into the etymology, what it means is that Noah's genealogy, so his genome, was not corrupted by the Nephilim. And so he was 100% human, as were his wife and sons. But there's a possibility that one or more of Noah's sons' wives was a carrier of the Nephilim gene. And so, again, I go into a lot more detail in my book, but
I have a question. Now,
yes.
Have you done any relation to your research? Have you done any relation to the Rh negative bloodlines? And
I have not, but I get that question a lot. So that is definitely on my list of things to research, because people, as they listen to me speak, will often have that question. I just haven't looked into that at all.
Well, I think you're going to find a lot of there's a person by the name of Robert Sepher, Sephr. And you can find him on the internet. Now, he's done a bunch of work on the Rh negative migrations, and they have to do with Noah and the boat. So the thing, it's very fascinating, because these are the very same bloodlines that go all the way up into the Queen of England, and every single president of the United States was Rh negative, and all these and all the main leaders in most countries were Rh negative. So it's interesting that these bloodlines go back, and maybe they go back to the exact people you're talking about.
Wow. Okay. Yes. Now I'm on the trail. That's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. Thank you for sharing, because now maybe there's some parallels here that may work together to actually determine something that may actually have some blood to it. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And that's why I think it's so important that we get together and we have these discussions, because we need each other. We all have a piece of the puzzle that we need to bring together, and that's how the full picture comes together. So I love doing these shows, because I learn something every time, and the questions that get asked and the way that the discussion evolves, it causes more light bulbs to go off. So thank you.
You're welcome. And I am RH negative, so I've done quite a bit of work on this and a few shows on it, and I've got quite a few friends that are in the community too. So if you need any help, just let me know after the show, and I can put you in touch with some people that have a really good handle on what was going on there.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So then, if we think about Ham, Noah's son, and we consider that he has a pattern or had a pattern in his life of sexual perversion, it's possible that he may have chosen a wife that was a carrier of the Nephilim gene, but she had an epigenetic marker that turned off that gene. But if there's a curse that's released in her bloodline, that we see happen in the life of Nimrod. So Ham's bad choices become Nimrod's bad predispositions, which he acted upon, and that can unlock the Nephilim gene. So back to what I was talking about earlier about how important it is to dig into the etymology of language. So there's a verse, Genesis 10:8, that if we read it in the English language, we barely get anything out of it. And it's not until you dig into the actual Hebrew meaning that it comes to life and begins to unlock these mysteries. So Genesis 10:8 says, Cush begot Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth. Okay, so if we start to consider, Nimrod's name in Hebrew means rebellion. And we know that's a hallmark trait of the Nephilim. But the phrase he began, in Hebrew, it's halal, and that means to profane, defile, or to pollute oneself through ritual or sexual means. When I saw that, I was like, oh my goodness, you don't get that at all from the English phrase, he began, right? You simply cannot understand that what's being talked about is that Nimrod polluted himself through ritual and sexual means. So hold on to that thought. I'll circle back in a minute. Now, another phrase in that verse is mighty one, and that's the Hebrew word gibberer, and that means mighty, strong, valiant, giant, tyrant, impetuous soldier or hunter. And it comes from the root word gabar, which means to prevail, to be strong, to show oneself mighty, to act proudly toward God. And so here we have the first mention of the word gibberer is in Genesis 6:4 when it's describing the Nephilim. So then if we realize that Nimrod, he wasn't born with the phenotype of the Nephilim, but he defiled his genome by engaging in that ritualistic sex acts. And so Nimrod's grandfather, Ham, through his iniquity of disrespectfully gazing at Noah's nakedness, created a predisposition for sexual perversion in his children and grandchildren. And we see that play out. So Ham's iniquity and Noah's curse, in conjunction with Ham's wife being a likely carrier of the Nephilim gene, that's what I believe set the stage for the Nephilim phenotype to emerge after the flood. So here we have Nimrod. He engages in these deviant sexual acts, and it flips the switch on the epigenetic marker, which unzips the dormant Nephilim gene. And that's how Nimrod can be, how he can become or began to be a mighty one or a giant. So when that kind of came together, I realized, okay, so now it's important to understand the characteristics of Nimrod. And we can see that he had this desire for control and domination over others. He suppressed his subjects by using fear and intimidation. So Brany, going back to what we were talking about earlier about fear, this goes all the way back to, Nimrod and possibly even before that. But for sure, Nimrod, we know that he used this fear and intimidation, and those are all Nephilim traits. And so Nimrod actually was Satan's first attempt at a type of Antichrist. And a lot of scholars agree that Nimrod was the first world leader. And so if we think about it, Nimrod was the first globalist, which is very interesting. And see, he was filled with such pride and arrogance. He thought that he could build with his own hands the Tower of Babel that would outmaneuver the Almighty God. And then if we think about in the Akkadian language, the term Babel means gate of the gods. And so here it ties into that portal or a stargate that Jimmy was talking about earlier. It's also a play on the Hebrew word, which means confusion. But so then I started to think, okay, well, what was the purpose for building the Tower of Babel? And, you know, and as we look in scripture, we can see that it says so that we may make a name for ourselves. And so that phrase in the Hebrew means to build a monument or memorial in order to draw fame and glory. And so that really begins to expose the motivation of Nimrod and his followers in that they wanted to be known. You know, they wanted the glory for themselves so that these subsequent generations would revere them. And that's the pride of life. And so this is what the Gibberers sought after. They wanted to be men of renown. But what's interesting, in another book that I read called On the Path of the Immortals, and it's by Thomas Horn and Chris Putnam, they actually propose yet another reason why the Tower of Babel was built, and that was that it was a stargate, similar to the Great Pyramid, that it was inspired by this forbidden knowledge. And so if we think about Nimrod becoming a hybrid, so he became part divine, part human in that Nephilim gene being unlocked, is it possible then that he had this acute awareness of where the presence of portals and stargates were? And so in building the Tower of Babel, what he was doing is he was fueling this insatiable hunger among the people of Babel to create this dimensional portal, enabling the sexual union between the divine and the cult priestesses. So here we have that Nimrod was not only an example of single incursion theory, but also he opened the door to multiple incursions with the Tower of Babel. So I think in answering the age-old question, I don't think it's an either or with multiple or single incursion. I think it's a both and.
Okay, so wow, that's a lot. My head is spinning a little bit, but so what do we do with this, Laura? I mean, how can we apply this information to how we live today and the kinds of choices that we make and the kinds of things that we need to learn about? What do we do with it?
Well, I think one of the most important things we do is knowledge is power. And so once we understand and, you know, come into awareness of this Nephilim agenda, we can begin to see how it's playing out here and now. And so we don't have to come under kind of that manipulation and intimidation. We don't have to bend our knee to fear. And recognizing, you know, fear is an emotion that we have, and it's not a bad emotion. You know, fear can be used rather than a barrier. It can boost us, you know, and help us grow as a person if we embrace fear. But so often what the globalists do, and again, the globalists and the Nephilim agenda is serving the same end goal, is they use fear to control us. And so that's why I feel like it's so important that I'm able to contribute a piece of this larger mosaic in that helping people understand the Nephilim agenda and how it all plays out. Now, one of the things that I did in my book, kind of bringing it to the here and now, is I coined the term Nephilim Host, and this is in chapter 13 of my book. And what in doing that, a Nephilim host represents someone who is partnered with the spiritual forces of darkness to carry out the Nephilim agenda. And so, you know, it's important to understand that the giants and the Nephilim, they weren't just during the times of antiquity, but this agenda has carried out all throughout history. And so if we understand that there are actually potentially Nephilim hosts here alive today, and many of them might be, you know, in positions of leadership or running our institutions, it helps us to understand kind of the bigger picture. And so we don't, once again, we don't come under that control, domination, manipulation. So one of the things, if it's helpful, is I can describe maybe what a Nephilim host looks like, because the Nephilim are so ethereal in nature, and I thought it was important to develop a set of criteria that would actually advance our ability to discern the presence of Nephilim within an individual. And so, what I did is I just looked at the biblical record, extra biblical manuscripts and ancient texts to look at the characteristics of the Nephilim and their giant offspring. And then what I was able to do was identify 4 physical traits and 19 behavioral characteristics of the Nephilim and their giant offspring. So I can go over that now, or if you feel like that's getting into the weeds a little bit, we can talk about how I trace the giants from the days of Noah to the dollar bill.
I don't mind going into the weeds, as long as it's not the weeds in Secaucus, New Jersey, and the mob didn't put me there. So if you guys want to get into the weeds, you go ahead. You get in as far in the weeds as you want, because I'm telling you, I'm fascinated.
Well, I want you to know, Laura, I am getting texts and messages and comments from all over the place. People are really fascinated with all this information. And we've got some really smart people out there, people who have really very good biblical knowledge, very good knowledge of just the world and sociology and so forth. And so this is, I think, tying together a lot of things. And we even have people that are asking for some things to be gotten into that I know we don't have time for tonight. So hopefully we will be able to bring you back. But I do want to give you another opportunity to share about your book, where we can get it, and also your website, if you want to throw that out there again before we continue.
Absolutely. So my website is nolongerenslaved.com, and you can purchase my book. It's called The Roots of the Federal Reserve. You can either purchase it straight from my website, or you can go to Barnes & Noble or Amazon and purchase it there. I'm on Telegram, and I have a public channel, and it's at Dunamis, Dunamis, Dunamis 444 Hertz, HZ. So that's another way to reach me. But I love to connect with people who are thinking along these lines, because, again, we all need each other. We need to bring our piece of the puzzle, because the Lord is just developing this mosaic of truth and understanding. And so I welcome feedback. I welcome connecting with others.
That's awesome. So maybe even some of these things or questions that people are bringing up, they might be able to contact you at those places.
Yeah.
And then your book again, and where it's purchased.
The Roots of the Federal Reserve, and you can purchase it either on my website or Barnes & Noble or Amazon.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah, so I just want to say, Danny was saying in the chat to ask you a question if you ever heard of Israeli News Live. It's a YouTube channel that goes quite extensively into Jewish giants. So maybe.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
no,
so she made that suggestion. It's called Israeli News Live, and so you may want to check that out. I just wanted to pop in here while I'm heading back to the boat with my fresh orange juice. All right, go ahead, you guys.
Definitely. Well, maybe what I'll do is, since you guys kind of gave me permission to go into the weeds,
go for it.
I will describe this set of criterion that I identified through, looking through all these ancient texts, as far as what are the criteria for someone who could meet that classification of Nephilim host. And so what I propose is that they need to have at least 3 of the physical traits or 3 or more of the behavioral characteristics. But if someone doesn't have the physical traits, then they need to meet at least 5 behavioral characteristics. And I'll give a disclaimer real quick before we go to break. I just want people to know that in constructing this set of criteria, I actually drew upon the concepts found in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, but I am by no means claiming, that this cluster of traits that I identify can be used to determine a clinical diagnosis. So I just want people to understand that, because really, in order to get to that level, a ton of research has to be done to confirm that these cluster of traits actually adequately identify a Nephilim host. So I just wanted to make that clear. Do we need to go to break, or should I jump in?
Yeah, where are we at there with that, Jim?
We got about 2 minutes before the break. So revolution.radio, freedomslips.com, #1 listener-supported radio network on the face of the plane, in the ether space, and beyond. And you can find us over here at freedomslips.com. You can become a patron. Like I say, 48 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's something good going on here. You can find it. If you're into it, I'm guaranteeing you there's a viewpoint here for you. 7 days a week, 48 hours a day. Studio A, Studio B, the Zazzle store. I mean, what can't you do over here? Seriously, you could call in tonight. There's roundtables every night. Late night roundtables. Phones are open. Call in, view your, get your viewpoint out there. But you can't do any of that unless the platform exists. Platform only exists when you make that donation. So come on down. Make the donation. Be a supporter. If you're listening now and you didn't donate last month, that means somebody paid it forward and you're riding on somebody else's coattails. Come on down. Be a supporter. It's a good thing I'm not a preacher, or I'll have a bunch of people converting. Come on down for Jesus, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so listen. When we come back, she promised it. She promised us the weeds, and I'm hoping that we're going to deliver us the weeds. Dr. Laura SanGer, ladies and gentlemen. The roots of the Federal Reserve go a lot deeper. As above, so below. Mom's Jimmy. It's in the microcosm. We'll be right back after a word about the shows going on here at Revolution.radio every single day. We'll be right back. All right. There it goes. 30 more minutes, you guys. You got about 5 minutes to drink something or get something to drink or whatever you like to do. And I'll get the...
I think I will get some water. I'll be right back.
Nice. I'll get the energy up coming back for this one here. Get everybody all jazzed up. So the fantastic... so we have a show Monday through Friday, late night on Clyde Lewis's network. And so definitely would like to have you come on and visit us on that show. But it's we're on Pacific time. You're in Utah. You're on Pacific time too, then, eh?
No, Mountain Standard.
Oh, Mountain. So what time is it for you right now?
It's 5:28.
All right. So yeah. So you're an hour different. Huh. That's weird. I don't. Well, maybe it was like that. Maybe it's a Mandela effect. I don't remember. I don't remember Utah being different when I was there.
Oh, we're different.
No, I get that. Yeah, I got to be honest though. I mean, I actually really enjoyed Utah when I was up there working. It was a good town. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to do. Yeah. we got. They had this thing going on then. I don't know if it's still going on, but we weren't allowed to have bars or liquor stores, but you could have a private club. And so, we were working from out of town. I don't drink, but my buddy drank. So we go to this bar, and the guy says, oh, yeah, hold on a second. It's a private club. You have to have a membership. And so he goes, how do you get a membership? And he goes, see that guy over there sitting at the bar with the plaid shirt on? Yeah.
Pay him a little extra.
Yeah, you see that guy? He goes, yeah, he drinks this. You buy him one, he'll sponsor you, and then you can come in. So what they do is they get all their buddies sitting at the bar. They just get their buddies drunk all night with all the tourists that come up trying to come in and have a drink.
Yeah, there you go.
It's so
they
funny.
Actually got rid of that. They no longer require that.
Oh, really? Well, that's good. That's good. Yeah, there was this kid that was working with us, and he was related to the people that the leather coach, like Coach bags, Coach luggage.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, so he was related. He was like a super rich kid, and somehow he got into doing technology for some reason. I mean, he didn't even know how to do his own laundry. That's how much of a rich kid he was.
Wow.
But we were in Utah, and he was staying in a different hotel than me and my partner were, and he befriended these people, and they literally busted in his hotel room and stole all his video games and all this stuff. It was such a trip, man, just because it's such like a religious state, and he got everything taken away.
Oh man.
It was funny, man.
Poor guy.
It was, yeah, it was funny. We had some fun with that guy the whole trip because, like I said, he didn't even know how to do his laundry. You know. All right, hang on a second.
And it was an eye-opener for him.
It was. But I'll tell you what, he was a smooth character. He was. He was definitely.
Did you school him, Jimmy?
Nah, I wouldn't say I schooled him, man. I back then I was more I was running the whole job or whatever, so I didn't hang out with him like a buddy, really. I kind of did, but not really too much. You know what I mean? Because I was the boss or whatever. So you start being buddies and dudes start showing up late. You guys ready? I'm late. Here we go.
So this battle can continue forward. Revolution. Radio! The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
I'm sorry. I forgot I was on the radio. I was just listening to that song. Man, I love that album. That is a great album. Wildflowers. Mom's Jimmy. It's in the MicroCosm. Brandy's got the captain's cap tonight. Aye, Skipper. I'm tossing you the keys, and we are about to go in the weeds with our guest, Laura SanGer.
I caught him this time, and I'll tell you what. If we're going to go in the weeds, I'm putting some boots on. I got me a weed whacker. We're diving in. Go for it, Laura.
Okay. Well, I was talking about this proposed criteria that I identified for Nephilim hosts, and there's 4 physical traits and 19 behavioral characteristics. And so I'll go through the physical traits first. So excessively tall, and we would want to rule out gigantism. Extraordinarily strong. Polydactyly, which is having 6 fingers and or 6 toes, and then red hair. And as you mentioned, Jimmy, a couple of times already, there is definitely a connection between red hair and the Nephilim traits, but I want to say something so I don't offend anyone with red hair. Just, to let you know, my grandmother, who is my spiritual mentor, and my aunt, they have red hair. And so I'm by no means saying that they were Nephilim hosts, but what I found is that the color red actually turns out to be a bit of a calling card for the Nephilim. And so it's a form of symbolism that I found throughout my investigation, really starting with when Esau chose to be red. And I don't know if we'll have time on tonight's show, but that transformation that Esau had to Edom, when he became Edom, that was a huge clue that unlocked a lot of this for me. So at some point, maybe I can go into that. If not tonight, maybe another time. But
I think we'd like that. Yes.
Okay. So, but in looking at the color red, it really came to the surface, whether that was with the Edomites, the elongated skulls of Paracas, Peru, or the red-haired cannibals that terrorized the northern Paiute tribe in Nevada, or the Tarim Basin mummies in China, or the Celts, the Scythians, or the Khazarians. It became clear that red hair is a trait of the Nephilim host. Now, it would be foolish to draw conclusions just based on one genetic marker, and so that's why you need a cluster of traits. But I just wanted to explain why red hair was included in those physical traits. So now, diving into the behavioral characteristics, and again, this is really important for us to understand, because as I read through these, you might be thinking of people that whether that's in the political realm or in media or Hollywood or entertainment or banking, that you can see, oh my gosh, yes, I can see these things. Now, again, we don't want to diagnose anyone because more research has to be done, but it's really about allowing us to see the big picture. So the behavioral characteristics of Nephilim hosts are lustfulness in conjunction with sexual misconduct, deceitfulness as indicated by repeated lying and purposeful misrepresentation for personal profit and pleasure, pervasive pattern of instability in relationships marked by control, manipulation, intimidation, and domination over others, rebellious behavior and disregard for the rule of law, haughty and prideful as if above reproach, vengeful or inappropriate intense anger, participation in sorcery, witchcraft, and/or the occult, reoccurring violent acts displaying disregard for the rights of others, a lack of remorse for heinous acts against other living beings, excessive focus on death-related topics and/or symbolism, an underlying dark personality that is masked by overinflated self-righteousness, a dishonesty in trade and business transactions, a propensity towards corruption. And then these next 7 are actually even more extreme. And what I propose is that if anyone has 2 or more in this category, then they would be considered a Nephilim host, irregardless if they have any other criteria. So sexual perversion involving pedophilia, sexual domination of others against their will, and/or bestiality, trafficker of humans, engage in cannibalism, commit treasonous acts, a pervasive pattern of engagement in sexual and/or blood occult rituals, commit human sacrifices, and the enslavement of others. And so I actually would add, after I wrote my book and it got published, I have, done more research. I'm a researcher into transhumanism, and I actually would add a 5th physical trait, and that would be someone having an altered genetic code. But so what was interesting is that as I identified...
Can I interrupt you there, Laura?
Yeah,
what do you mean by the altered genetic code? Can you just explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so remember what I went into with the VAX?
Yes.
And how the VAX can alter the genetic code?
Right. Like what they're doing with the super soldiers and that kind of...
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify. Thanks.
Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to point out too, now on these Rh negative bloodlines, there's a good Rh negative bloodline and a bad Rh negative bloodline, and the bad bloodline are the ones that have been in charge and running stuff, because they're using some of the traits that come with the Rh negative bloodline against the people to achieve exactly what you're talking about. And I think what you're describing here can be said that this is what most people would say that they believe that goes on with these elites in the background.
Yes.
Everything that you're mentioning here, I just wanted to jump in on that.
Yeah, and so that really helped. Like, once I began to see this and was able to identify these traits, it helped me follow the Nephilim and their agenda, from the days of Noah to the Federal Reserve note, just like you're talking about with those elites.
Wow. Okay, so are we out of the weeds yet?
Did you? Yeah, let us know when we get in the weeds, because this is our territory. I mean, this is, yeah, this is a clearing here. When there's a fireplace with barbecue over here, I got a keg.
Okay, here we go. We're going deeper. Ready?
Go ahead.
Let's go.
Okay, so, as I mentioned, the color red is a symbol that I found consistent all throughout history tying the Nephilim. And, it's been said that symbolism will be their downfall. Well, so if we think about the color red, it's indelibly linked to the Edomites. And so the first mention of the Hebrew word for red, which is adamone, was to describe Esau's birth. And so it means reddish of the hair or complexion. And so this transformation took place when Esau became Edom. And the Hebrew word for Edom is Adam, and it means to be red. So then I was thinking, what the heck does it mean to be red? And so I began looking, first in biblical meaning of the color red. And of course we have Jesus's blood, which is a positive connotation. But aside from that, the majority of the connections of the color red in scripture actually align with the seed of Satan. And so we see in Isaiah chapter 1, it represents sin, the blood of evil deeds. In Revelation 6, red represents chaos, death, and destruction. And then in Revelation 12, it actually represents Satan. In Revelation 17, it's the beast, mystery, Babylon, and martyrdom. And so now if we think more about Esau chose to be red, and that choice actually had substantial ramifications upon his generational line. And so Esau branded himself red, or Edom, when he willingly traded his birthright blessing for red stew. And see, now I think something much deeper than just a desire for lentil soup was at work here. Because what Esau did is he sealed a transaction, so one that would constrict his allegiance to a particular seed. And if we keep in mind that seed war that I talked about, this becomes very important. So in essence, he aligned himself with red, which is the seed of Satan, and he rejected the birthright blessing of Abraham and Isaac. So on that fateful day, he declared himself to be separate from Yahweh. So now if we think about, okay, what are the characteristics of Esau then? And in Genesis 25, it talks about Esau, he was this cunning hunter, a man of the field. Well, again, if we dig into the meaning of these words, the word hunter in Hebrew is sa'id, and it comes from the root word sud, which means to lie in wait, to chase, to take provision. And so we think about Esau, he was this rugged outdoorsman. He was really skilled at hunting, and he probably loved the thrill of the hunt, stalking an animal, lurking in the shadows, and then moving in for the kill. But what's interesting is there's another meaning of that root word sud, and it's a figurative meaning, and it's to describe someone who lies in wait to catch a human. So in other words, to entrap someone with the intent to exploit for personal gain. So that'll become important in just a minute. So then if we turn to other texts, so extra biblical manuscripts like the book of Joshua, it actually provides us with some more detail and background. So in chapter 27 of Joshua, it talks about how Nimrod and Esau, they lived at the same time, and both were well known as hunters. In fact, Nimrod was jealous of Esau and his hunting skills. And so there's a time where Esau goes out hunting, and it's actually the backdrop to what happens right before he trades his birthright blessing. And so Esau's in the field hunting, and he finds Nimrod and his men are also out in the field hunting. And so Esau lurks in the shadows, and he watches Nimrod, and he waits until Nimrod is separated from the majority of his men. And so that happened where Nimrod and just 2 of his men went off in a different direction. And so what Esau did is he stalked him, and then when the time was right, he jumped out, had his sword, and cut off the head of Nimrod. And so this is the backdrop to what happened in Genesis 25, when it says Esau comes in from the field faint and weary and famished. And it's because he exerted a tremendous amount of energy killing Nimrod and 2 of his guards. So he was on the run from the rest of Nimrod's men. And that's when he finds Jacob in the tent making lentil stew. And so the story, it begins to bring to light kind of this conniving, deceitful, murderous aspect of Esau's personality. But another interesting thing is, so red lentil stew was actually the traditional meal of comfort that the eldest son was supposed to make for the grieving father. So here we have Isaac grieving the loss of Abraham, and instead of Esau fulfilling his birthright role and caring for his father by making this red lentil stew, he's off in the fields killing things. And so that's the backdrop of the transformation from Esau to Edom. So Esau chose to be red by covering his hands with murderous blood instead of fulfilling his role as the firstborn son. And so it makes sense why God would say, Jacob I love and Esau I hate. And so once I realized that, I realized, okay, I need to follow the trail of the Edomites. And so I do this all throughout my book, and it leads to Rome and Khazaria. And from Khazaria, we have the Ashkenazi Jews, and from them we have the Rothschilds. They were Ashkenazi Jews. And then we have Jacob Schiff and Paul Warburg, who were agents of the Rothschilds, and they were instrumental in birthing the Federal Reserve. And so that's it in a nutshell. Now my book goes into much more detail, but that really helped me set the stage to dig further to uncover the roots of the Federal Reserve.
Where can we find your book?
It's on Barnes & Noble and Amazon. You can also find it on my website, which is nolongerenslaved.com.
I'm fascinated with what you're saying, and it ties in a lot to the research that we've been doing recently on the tribe of Dan.
Yes.
And it's really, the tribe of Dan is present all the way into where we see today the Queen of England. And these bloodlines that, you know, the Queen of England is literally, her blood goes back to ancient Egypt. So, and as far as the blood that's in Egypt now, it doesn't even go back to where the Queen's blood goes. The people that are there now are not the bloodline of the original Egyptians. And so a lot of those Babylonian priests, they migrated and became crypto-Jews. You know, they were Jews, but they were really crypto-Babylonian magicians. And we see the migration of this over to Europe and the Druidic practices, and you also will find these giants go right over to Scotland. You can see representation of giants' swords, and it's interesting that your information is tying into a bunch of the things that we did. Maybe some of this stuff you maybe haven't looked at, but it might tie right in. You might find that this bloodline in the tribe of Dan migration might exactly tie in with your information precisely.
That's outstanding. Yeah, I haven't done any real research on the tribe of Dan, so I'd be fascinated to see kind of the overlay and how it ties together.
Yeah, I dropped you a link in there in the Skype. You can take a look at that. Yeah, you might get some good juice out of that there. My name's Jimmy. It's in the MicroCosm. We're sitting here with Dr. Laura, and she's breaking us off into the weeds, and we appreciate every inch of these weeds that you're breaking off for us, Dr. Laura. Go ahead, Brany.
Definitely, and I'm sort of, you know, Jimmy, when you traipse through the mud there behind you, You got kind of big feet, dude. You're slinging mud all over me. Yeah. But this is really, really fascinating. We're kind of running up against the top of the hour here, Laura, so we don't have a lot more time. I'd just like to know if there's anything else that you would like to add, and definitely we would love to have you come back. But until that time, is there something else you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, I just want to, end with hope. I feel like we are never without hope. Some of these things are very intense that we're talking about, but, one of the ways that we can break free, I didn't spend a lot of time talking about the Federal Reserve, but it is this debt enslavement system. And, one of the ways we break free from this is we awaken from our slumber. And once we're awakened, we join the fight. And what I mean by that is, the truth will set us free. And so when we come together like what we're doing right now, we're sharing information, we're sharing nuggets of truth that we've gathered along the way. We are creating this mosaic, this big picture of truth. And from that truth, we have hope. And we know that once we're awakened, see, that's the globalist worst nightmare, is when Americans and citizens around the world awaken to their agenda and are armed with truth. We become their biggest nightmare. And I believe the opportune time is upon us. We're right at this precipice of, our nation imploding, or we have breakthrough. And I believe breakthrough is coming, but it takes each one of us. And you know what? Some of you listening, you might not be gifted at speaking or writing or, music or this or that, but there is something that you have to contribute, whether it's just striking up a good conversation with your neighbor, or whether it's doing your own research and educating your kids on some of the things that you're finding. We all have a part to play. And if we come together in truth and in love and sharing an openness of ideas and critically thinking and challenging one another, we are going to see that breakthrough. And so I just want to encourage people and bring hope in that way.
That is so appropriate. That is so correct. And that coming together, if we come together, it's going to blow the whole agenda.
Absolutely.
Because coming together is absolutely what they don't want us to do. And even if you don't necessarily accept or believe or understand everything we've talked about here today, I pray that even if you just go away with that thought, what can you do? And just to come together with your neighbor, and don't fall into the fear. Don't let the fear overtake you. Use it to help you get through what you need to get through, but it doesn't have to overcome you. It's there for a good reason. And just remember that it's there to guide you, not to overtake you. Laura, it has been such a pleasure. I just feel so honored to have you here and to be able to have you break out the information in your book. And I really encourage, I'm going to go out and get the book. I think it's something that it sounds like one of those books that you read it and then you go back and you keep going back to it and referring. And I think it's a really probably wonderful reference to have in your library. So we hope to see you again. Thank you so very much.
Yes, thank you very much. We really appreciate you, and we'll definitely want to have you back and have you over on our nighttime show too, if you can. My name's Jimmy. It's in the MicroCosm Prime Time with Brany LoU, Dr. Laura SanGer, and you can find her books over on Amazon. And we thank you for joining us tonight, Brany. What a great job. Fantastic guest, fantastic show. And I can only think of one thing to say right now as we head on out the door and the sun's going down on the West Coast. Look, it's 4:20 again. Damn. The sun's going down on the West Coast, and there's only one thing I can say to everybody. If you just write your goal down and try to get there one step at a time every day, just move a little closer. Just go out and get it and make it happen. No one's going to do it for you. God gives you opportunity. He doesn't give you your dreams come true. He gives you opportunity, and it's what you make of it. So go out and get it. Jimmy, Brany, Dr. Laura SanGer, thank you very much. We'll see you tonight, 10:30 Pacific.
Good night, all.
freedomsloops.com. Come on down, become a patron. Stay tuned. Fenton Perspective coming up next. Mom's Jimmy. We'll see you tonight, or we'll see you on Friday. However you want to roll it. Don't worry, we're there. There we go. We're out of there. And I got to feed the dogs. Thank you so much, Dr. Laura. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Like
Thanks
I say,
for having me, guys. It was fantastic.
Yeah, so I'll send you the recording as soon as I'll get to it in just a bit. So Brany, everybody, I got to hang up right now. I got some stuff I got to do. So like I say, thank you so much. Yeah. And you guys talk amongst yourselves. I'll see you later tonight, 10:30 Pacific right here. Talk to you guys later.